I hope that you are enjoying your break and that you are having a great holiday, or perhaps did have a great holiday. We're talking about competition and cooperation in this lecture. We're going to be looking at competition and cooperation as processes. We're going to break them down into components and hopefully get a deeper understanding. And also we're going to look at a few of the psychological studies, as well as consider some of the social factors. All right, so the first question I have for you is this. Is competition good or bad? And if we were in the classroom, I'd likely have you raise your hand. And you might be surprised that there isn't a consensus or an agreement on the answer to this question. Although I think most of the folks I have talked with about this consider competition to be a positive thing. So we're also going to see how we might be able to enhance cooperation, even in a competitive environment. Alright, so I'm going to attach these two videos as links, and I will see if I can't just include them into our presentation. We can see some very specific examples of competition gone bad and also competition gone good in athletics, in sporting competition. And so we'll take a look at those.
I don't know, some hard black stick. Something really hard. Help me. We're gonna get you to the training room
Where'd the guy go get outside?
Hey, Frank, this way. Frank, went down that way. He's a white guy, tall, leather jacket. All they know is a white, tall white guy with a leather jacket on.
He said he went down this way. Yeah, see anybody coming?
Today is the 20th anniversary of the whack heard around the world. A man attacking figure skate superstar Nancy Kerrigan, slamming her knee with a club, putting her chance to compete in the Olympics in jeopardy. It was a drama we could not get enough of. That was back in 1994. And now there's a new chapter. And Amy, I know you have this story for us.
That's right. And we all remember the stunning attack, but it was nearly trumped by the shocking twist of who was actually responsible for it. A man hired by Kerrigan's chief rival, Tonya Harding. And now, 20 years later, Harding is talking.
It was an epic battle of the blades. Ice Princess Nancy Kerrigan versus powerhouse skater Tonya Harding, both with their eyes on one prize, the chance at Olympic gold. Now, in a revealing new interview for ESPN Films' The Price of Gold, Harding is breaking the ice about one of the biggest scandals in sports history.
You just want to like crawl in a closet and say, go away, leave me alone.
What happened? She said something.
At the U.S. Figure Skating Championships, Kerrigan's right knee was struck with a baton by an unidentifiable man.
Why?
Nancy Kerrigan, the American figure skater, who was widely considered a favorite to win a medal at the Winter Olympics, was attacked.
Harding's ex-husband hired a group of hitmen to hurt Kerrigan and her Olympic odds. Harding denied any involvement in the plot.
I just couldn't believe what's being said and stuff.
Small town in the middle of Washington State, on a field inside a chain-linked fence, in a game fewer than 100 people saw. A home run memorable not for the distance it traveled, or the game it decided, but for the meaning it carried. The last Saturday in April, the second game of a softball doubleheader between Central Washington and Western Oregon.
Well, we were both neck and neck fighting for the conference championship.
As a senior, this was Sarah Tucholsky's last chance to win a championship. She'd never hit a home run before, not in college, not in her life.
I'm 5'2", I'm not very tall. I'm more a line drive hitter. I don't hit for power.
But in the top of the second inning, with 2 runners on the second pitch, that changed.
I hit that pitch and it just went.
And we're just cheering, and the runners are cheering as they round the base to head home. And then I'm going, where's Sarah?
In her excitement, Tucholsky failed to touch first base, so she quickly turned back.
Her pivoting leg just didn't pivot with her. And I heard her kind of yell, and she just dropped to the ground, and I was like, oh no.
Just fell immediately and was in a lot of pain. Just, you know, I tried to keep my legs straight, but I was in so much pain that I couldn't really keep still.
Tucholsky, with a torn ACL, crawled back to first base. She was a long way from reaching home plate and keeping her first and only home run.
When she got back to first base, she laid there and she hugged on to first base. And then at that time, I was staring at the base and I go, what on earth are we going to do?
And I turned the umpire standing right next to me. I said, what is the ruling if I put somebody in for Sarah? He said, it'll be a 2-run single.
If anybody would have, on her team, would have helped Sarah, she would have been called out.
That was the problem. None of Tucholsky's teammates were allowed to touch her. That's when Central Washington's Mallory Holtman, a player with more home runs than any other in conference history, a player for the opposing team, spoke up.
I went to the home plate umpire and asked if we could pick her up and carry her, and he looked at me a little strange.
And the umpire went and said, yes, you can do that. I'm still standing there in shock. I said, thank you so much.
We asked her, so like, is it okay if we pick you up and carry you around the bases? And I say yes, and you know, and say thank you. And she says, you hit the ball over the fence, you deserve it.
For that reason only, because she deserved it, Holtman and Wallace began to carry the injured Tucholsky, stopping to touch her left foot on each base as the 3 made their way around the diamond.
We actually started laughing because we were just wondering what this would look like to all the people in the stand. When I looked up, I didn't see, you know, giant like smiles and screams. I saw emotion and tears and people crying.
It's a great moment when someone has character to step up and do the right thing at the right time.
It's emotional. You're proud to be associated with those kids.
That's the first home run of the season for number 8, Sarah Tucholsky.
The fact is, you know, I made my goal. I hit a home run, and yeah, it's my last at bat of my career, but I, you know, made my goal, so I'm proud of myself.
Mallory Holtman, Liz Wallace, and the Central Washington team lost the game that day, 4-2. Sarah Tucholsky lost the rest of her season and her career to a knee injury. But for the spirit of sportsmanship, a greater victory, made on a long trot around the bases, a trip that truly touched them all.
I have a lot of respect for her and put her in high regards, her and her teammates. And, you know, I can't thank her enough.
All right, so competition defined is just this, social process, and it involves rewards. So there's some type of reward, whether that be an intrinsic or an extrinsic reward, and it's based on comparing performances during a similar or same task, or perhaps, obviously participating in the same event. And we see that cooperation is defined as another social process, and in this way we see performance is evaluated and rewarded in terms of the group achievement. And that's something that can be challenging. I know we've talked about group dynamics, but if we can learn to cooperate, often the results, the outcome is more supportive, it's better. So let's take a look at the competitive situation. So we're going to start, and we look at the top diamond there, I guess. It's not really a diamond, is it? Anyway, so the objective competitive situation. So let's think about what that means. It's objective, it is just what the situation is. It's the outside events that we are now going to participate in. It could be the game, it could be the race, it could be something along those lines. And then we see, if we move down and over to your right, that then we have this subjective competitive situation. And we see in between, we have personality dispositions. So this is what a person perceives of the objective competitive situation. Recall back to last lectures, the cognitive evaluation theory. And so here we see that the way that somebody perceives the situation is going to affect their response to the competition. All right, and then we can tell that the abilities of that individual, certainly physically as well as mentally, are going to lead to a response. So we have the situation itself, the way that we've responded to or perceived that situation, and then based on our current level of ability, we respond, and then there are consequences to our responses. And that may be affected by our personal motives. Are we motivated? Are we amotivated? And the consequences in sports often are very easy to measure. We're looking at points and wins, etc. In other situations, it may not be quite so black and white. And then, of course, the attitudes from the consequence can affect the next or even the same objective situation. So this is truly interwoven. You must, however, consider all of these aspects when thinking of or evaluating a competitive situation. It isn't just black and white. Everyone will respond differently to the same situation, and based on those responses, the consequences will unfold. Do take a look at this and make note. All right, so again, just going through this a little more specifically. The objective competitive situation, remember that we're comparing with some standard or perhaps another performance. And here we're also noticing that at least one other person is aware of the comparison. Now this could be argued that some competitive situations are internal. We're competing with our own performance, if you will. But in this way, truly we are considering competition as being with another person. And so therefore it's important that somebody's aware, or else the dynamics are altered. And then, of course, the subjective situation, how the person perceives, accepts, and appraises that objective competitive situation. And that is definitely influenced by personality and perhaps where a person is in their life at this moment. Sometimes we see that a person is affected by things going on in their life, has nothing to do with the situation at hand, but indeed our internal state is going to affect how we respond to that competition. All right, so the response is now whether we approach or avoid. So remember that from priming, in our discussions of priming. Do we have an approach or an avoidance response? And that is based on many different things, certainly physiological, psychological, how well prepared we are, how well trained we are, and again, the psychological factors. Maybe a person has kind of a negative view of competition and tends to withdraw. Or a person may be very heightened by the situation. And then the response, well, then we have consequences to the response. And that's where we can begin an objective evaluation. And that will be compared to some type of performance, whether that be the other teams or a previous record, etc. They began looking at the psychological components of competition way back in 1898. So the first study on record is this from Triplets Cyclists in 1898. And they found that when they had cyclists ride alone and have them do their very best, go their very fastest, and compare that to their performance when there was actually someone else they were competing with, they found that when there was another person involved, that the performance was heightened. So even if a person feels like they're giving their 100% best and it's just them in the room or in the competition, in fact, studies show us that having that other person present, or perhaps virtually present even, can stimulate a better performance. And then we look at some other studies, Deutsch's puzzles in 1949. So in this case, there were two groups. We had a competition group and a cooperation group. And they basically had the job or the task of putting together as many puzzles as possible in a certain time frame. And they found at the end that the competition group students were more self-centered. They were not really interacting as much. And their efforts were truly just about beating the other people. And of course, you can argue, well, that's probably what they're supposed to do. But let's see how it worked out. They also had more closed communication within their group. So there wasn't as much cooperation, obviously. They were focusing on that competition aspect. And they began to exhibit this group conflict and distrust. So not only were they not communicating, but also they became more guarded when working with their teammates. The cooperation group students, they were basically told they would be evaluated as a group and as opposed to individually, and they did communicate more openly. There seemed to be a true effort amongst the individuals to create that group output. They shared information, helped each other out, and they also developed friendships, apparently, that lasted beyond this study. And this is the key point. They actually solved more puzzles. So all of the other stuff is interesting, particularly if you are a psychologist. But if you're really trying to get something done, then we see that cooperation may be a better strategy. This is one of my clients and friends. It's Kevin Ross. He's on, I believe, a couple of different occasions, maybe more, been the world champion Muay Thai fighter and is still competing and always has this great attitude about competition and even cooperation within his sport, and is very much a person that I refer to often as having a self-mastery focus. So I always like to take a moment and give props to Kevin Ross. And so here we see that competition is defined as not really either being good or bad. I mean, competition in and of itself is just neutral. It's really what we bring to it. Our own attitudes and our own, talents, abilities, etc. But competition in and of itself, for the purposes of our class, is going to be considered as neutral. And it really depends on, the social environment, the way performers view competition, and, certainly other factors. You might think of a few. If you've got something going on in your personal life, And if you've perhaps experienced a great loss, or maybe you've been ill, that may affect your response to the situation. And here we will look at Malice in the Palace, and I will see Malice at the Palace. I will see if I can't insert that video into this conversation.
Nobody can ever take that away from him.
Good balance scoring. Artest with 24, O'Neal had 20, Crozier 15, Tinsley 13, and Jackson with 12. All 5 starters in double figures.
The Pacers have played a very intelligent game tonight.
Then Wallace is fouled, and Wallace did. Oh, Wallace right at Artest. This has potential to be serious if they don't get between. Wallace upset. Players trying to hold each other off. Steven Jackson and Rasheed Wallace trying to be peacemakers. Now Jackson yelling. Wallace still going. You need the coaches in there to get him away. Jackson challenging Derek Coleman. Somebody should just get Jackson out of there. That's what causes the problem. Rasheed Wallace did an excellent job trying to keep everybody away and trying to keep the peace. But it started after Artest with a hard foul on Wallace after he got behind him.
One thing that people don't understand, when you're involved in a rivalry like this where the emotions are running at an all-time high, you have adrenaline flowing, and especially when fans are the ones who instigate these types of altercations. A player, in essence, is looking for an opportunity because they've dealt with so much ridicule from these fans, the racial slurs, I mean, throwing things. It's ridiculous, and then at that point, oftentimes you just lose control emotionally.
And you're going to hear people talk about players having to show restraint, this, that, and the other. You know, most people, the average person on the street, they wouldn't even show the kind of restraint that players do just listening to the heckling and abuse that you take in the course of a game as a professional athlete. But we understand that's part of the territory. We understand that kind of comes with it. But now when you cross the line and you physically throw an object or physically touch a player, all bets are off then. Players have a right to protect themselves, and nobody's going to show that kind of superhuman restraint. Any person would have done the same thing Ron Artest did in that situation.
Well, we all absolutely understand that, and it's going to be real interesting to see how the league handles this. You know Bennett Wallace is going to get a couple of game suspension because he touched Ron Artest. You know Ron Artest is going to get suspended because he went into the stands. You know Steven Jackson is going to get suspended because he threw a punch. The question is, will those Indiana Pacers deserve to be suspended? That is the question right now. It's going to be real interesting to see how the league handles it and how the Players Association comes to the defense of their players, because I absolutely...
All right, so we do see some examples where competition has brought out perhaps the negative side. Well, no perhaps about it. It is kind of a negative story. So in this case, we see that this father, Thomas, is 42, and he was watching his 10-year-old during a summer stick practice. So playing hockey, and we're familiar, hockey can be a pretty violent sport. But this father was very concerned about how aggressive these 10-year-olds were being, so he screamed out to the coach. And you know how parents sometimes get involved, they insert themselves. So he called out from the stands, and the coach turned around and said, hey, you know, this is hockey. Your kid's playing hockey. And then the next thing that happened, Dad, 275 pounds, jumped over and started beating up the coach, who was a much smaller person. He kept punching him in the face. The kids are all screaming at him to stop. And in fact, by the time it was broken up, the coach had died. Certainly not the father's intention, I would guess, but yeah, that was the consequence. And I do believe that he was convicted for manslaughter. And so we see that this is a situation where perhaps Dad has something else going on. Maybe he has kind of a violent nature, and the circumstances led to this horrific response. Certainly not the usual, but a very extreme example. I'm just going to take a brief look at some quotes from athletic and other professionals. Arthur Ashe, you can read this. He associates the killer instinct with a heightened emotional state, and he doesn't like it as much. He prefers harmony in everything, including the court, the officials, and the crowd. He is more comfortable with the cooperative side. Whereas we see that James Michener, he loves competition. You see, I love it. I seek it out. I prosper under its lash. He feels that competition sort of spurns him forward, and he would find life quite dull without it. And this is the one I think I like the most. Mariah Burton Nelson, she says that opponents present you with a chance to learn who you are, to notice what you want. It gives you a chance to rise to the occasion, and that's what makes athletes learn. And we can look at that as well in other domains rather than athletics. Opponents can make us swifter, wiser, and more effective, and we welcome them. And this may be a wonderful attitude or perspective to adopt. All right, so we see through the studies that cooperation as opposed to competition tends to produce better performance. Of course, this depends on what the task is. We can't really ever get down to a precise prescription when we're discussing the human psyche. And my friend Kevin Ross, he embodies this idea. It can serve as a positive source of motivation to improve and refine skills. So particularly athletes after a loss, if they can begin to adopt this ideal that now I can learn from this and it will make me stronger and better the next time. So the prisoner's dilemma is an interesting topic, and I used to go into quite a lot of detail here, but I think it's beyond the scope of our class. However, I do like to mention it. Prisoner's dilemma came from game theory and was born in the Cold War, during the Cold War. And although you were probably not born or maybe very young, there was a great concern for a period of time that either Russia or the United States would nuke the other country. And of course, that would devastate humanity as a whole. No one really wins there. And so many scientists, social psychologists, economists began this study of game theory to begin to understand how people, governments will respond to certain aspects of a competitive situation. And it is very interesting. We find that people who are in a situation perhaps where they've been arrested and someone else is arrested and they're being pressured in separate rooms to rat on the other person, what some of the outcomes of that can be, and what type of environment and cues can alter and affect the response. So I suggest, particularly if this is interesting to you, Google Prisoner's Dilemma. There's a lot of good information out there, but I'm going to leave it at that for the purposes of this lecture. And then we see a study that has been quoted and discussed, and you may run into from time to time, from Sharif and Sharif, and they did this summer camp study, and they took a group of boys to a summer camp, basically, and it was a true study. And they specifically divided the groups, the boys, into two groups, and they made it very competitive. They were studying how these boys would respond to competitive situation, and it worked very well. In fact, the competition became so extreme between the two groups that they began to become concerned, and also considered ending the study early, that it was seemingly out of hand. The boys began to steal the other camp's food and sabotage their tents and sleeping bags and things that may be actually dangerous out in the wilderness. But then something unexpected happened, and there was a great storm. And the storm was so severe that the boys had to pull together as one group in order to salvage the camp and supplies and be safe during the storm. And so we see that this outside force seemingly brought them together. And we're going to call those superordinate goals. And through this study and studies thereafter, they did find that if you can insert some type of superordinate goal into a situation that has become highly competitive, often we get back to balance, that some of the cooperation can soften the edges, if you will. So if you will recall, perhaps on September 11th, how the country, for at least a brief moment, began to unite. We see it when we have great disasters, the tsunami, unfortunate incidents such as Hurricane Katrina, and somehow these great tragedies tend to bring people, at least initially, together and united. So that would be a very extreme example of a superordinate goal. But we can utilize this information if we have teams that we are working with, if we have groups of individuals, or even individuals themselves. And the competition is so fierce. Sometimes if the team or the group or the individuals can start working on a superordinate goal, it resolves itself. All right, so here's my story, and I'm sticking to it. You may not know who this is. This is Governor John Hickenlooper of the state of Colorado. And I met John, or Governor Hickenlooper, I suppose, is more appropriate. Many, many years ago, he opened a business with several partners called the Wine Coop Brewing Company. Now, the Wine Coop Brewing Company was the first brew pub in the state of Colorado. Of course, you guys are used to having brew pubs everywhere, but it wasn't that long ago that brew pubs really only existed on the coast and really not at all in some cases. So John, Governor Hickenlooper, and his partners went through an awful lot of trouble to get a law passed in the state of Colorado that would allow them to brew beer and sell beer in the same building. That was illegal. And they did get that law passed, and we started the first microbrewery in the state of Colorado, and that was the Wine Coop Brewing Company. I was very fortunate to be invited to be one of the opening bartenders, and I worked for them for 10 years. And we opened several satellite restaurants, and it was great success, hugely successful. It's down in Lodo in Denver, if you've been down by the ball field. Well, all of that is new. When we opened the Wine Coop, there was nothing down there except a lot of empty buildings and homeless people. And I remember very clearly walking out from work and tripping over homeless people and having my car broken into about every month, and it was an interesting place. Nonetheless, we opened and we were 4 deep at the bar, morning, noon, and night, and we were making tons of money, and it was very, very successful. And here's some pictures of the area. And gosh, I sure wish that I would have known then what I know now, and I would have purchased a couple city blocks of that area. Well, word got out, and about the same time they began to build Coors Field for the Colorado Rockies, the baseball team. And it was just, like a block away. So suddenly all of these other brew pubs start springing up all over the nation, but certainly in Denver. And we have Rock Bottom and Breckenridge, Blue Moon, and several smaller ones. And we were really scared, the employees. We were the only game in town. And John Hickenlooper was always had a really interesting approach to marketing. He always got us in the news. We were always involved in the community. We were somehow in the paper and in the news all the time without paying for that advertisement, simply because we were involved in every aspect of the Denver community. So we went to John. I remember this meeting very clearly, and we're like, what are we going to do? And it's going to really hurt our business. And he said, no, we're not going to look at it that way. He said, why not look at it like this? Instead of all of us fighting over the last piece of pie, why don't we just make the pie bigger? His idea was that if we promote the new brew pubs coming in, we accept them with a sense of cooperation, we even pass out in our establishment maps of how to get there, that we can then invite more people to come down and try fresh beer. And the more people that are aware, the larger the pie is. And as long as we continue to provide great service and an excellent product, nothing bad will happen. We will simply get more people in. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. And I've always remembered that and utilized that as one of my foundational motivations whenever putting something together. If you can create a win-win-win situation, you are nearly guaranteed some success. I learned that from John, and then he became mayor, and now, of course, he's governor, and the state of Colorado is prospering during this time period. There it is now. There's the ball field. If you've not ever gone to a professional baseball game, this is the most beautiful stadium, and I highly recommend it. Now, of course, this is one of the prestigious areas of Denver and costs an arm and a leg. And the Wine Coop is still going. Last time I was there was our 20th anniversary, and I got to dance with John, who was then Mayor Hickenlooper, on the bar. And so I don't know if he could dance on the bar as governor now. Probably not. All right, so again, we're back at this question. It's not inherently good nor bad. It is neither productive nor destructive. It's a neutral process. The environment determines its effects to a great degree. We have learned about conformity, group dynamics. We have learned about how IQ is even shown to be reduced when there's a large group dynamic. And so we can understand how that is going to affect competition. We've seen the videos of the big, issues that they have in some of the international soccer games, etc. And it really can become quite something. And so we can see the competition in and of itself is just sort of like an empty vessel. It is what we bring to it, and it is what the environment also adds that really dictates the outcome. So we like to look at competition and cooperation as complementary concepts. They're not opposites necessarily. There needs to be a blend. Pure cooperation or pure competition really I don't know if that's even possible, but may not provide the best outcome. I'm not a great believer in everybody should get a ribbon. I don't know that 8th place is a place. So I think that competition can certainly serve for some valuable learning opportunities, etc. And it should be taught in this way. Again, these are concepts that we know about. This is not something brand. Oh, really? I've never heard of this before. But if we can teach this, and particularly in sports and in athletics, it just helps to bring some thoughtfulness, some consciousness and awareness to any type of process. We do find that people who are incredibly successful, they figure out how to blend both of these things. They know how to, keep their competitive edge, but also how to cooperate. And that is truly what I have found in the top tier professional athletes I've had the opportunity to work with. Those who, stayed very balanced and grounded when they needed to be, could be fiercely competitive, but also had a sense of brotherhood, if you will, of peoplehood, I suppose is better, giving back to their community, supporting their opponent. I find this to be very true in MMA. Mixed martial arts athletes have this incredible blend of being fiercely competitive in the cage and yet as equally as supportive to even their nemesis. And I have found this to be true with MMA athletes, even more so than yoga athletes, which is kind of hysterical. All right, so we see that some of the attributes related to both, as we're looking at these as not being polar opposites, you have a sense of mission, whether you're being competitive or cooperative. There's this overreaching goal. Both require a strong work ethic and good use of resources. It's important to manage your resources, whether they be internal or external resources. Also, if you're going to be successful in either type of an approach, a competition or cooperation, being prepared is important. And I think a good, healthy love of challenge and change. Change is something you can count on. Things are going to change. And learning how to learn from change and flow through change and not be, thrown off or intimidated will be a very good tool to have. And of course, great teamwork underlies any type of success in a group setting. We'll look now at some of the structure of games so we can further break them down. Sometimes breaking down these types of components helps, particularly in a more subjective area. So competitive means competitive ends. King of the Mountain, 100-yard dash, very specific type of competition. and much more, individuals really working for themselves and no need for cooperation specifically. Where we see the cooperation come in is often in team sports. So the team itself must cooperate in order to compete. So the means is cooperative. We must learn to cooperate well, communicate well, think of all of the plays, perhaps on a football team, on a basketball team. Really, all of that requires cooperation. But then the end is to compete against another group or another team. And we see individual means individual ends. And so this is much more intrinsic, not necessarily a competition with another individual. And so this might be that area where we can talk about just working out and maybe, air quotes, competing with ourselves. And then cooperative means individual ends. And this may be, you might consider like the Olympic teams. So they're cooperating, or track and field sports, where people cooperate for training, traveling. They're all part of the same team, if you will. They fly under the same banner, but their performance is one person against another person. And cooperative means cooperative ends, probably much more about recreational sports, and you can see the example that they're using. So we can take a game that's competitive, and we can kind of add some cooperative elements to it, which is very helpful, particularly when you're working with kids. So this may not be quite as successful working with adults. It might seem contrived and silly, but for kids, it's a great way to teach them how to involve both components. We can certainly just do cooperative type games, but we can also redevise the traditional games and make them more cooperative. So some ways to do that is to just make sure, particularly where kids are involved, that everybody has a chance to participate in some way, and this gives everybody a chance to feel like they're part of it, as well as letting people try different sports, different positions on the team. Coaches are very well known for playing their strong players. It makes sense. They want to put their best foot forward, but particularly when working with children, we want to give everybody a chance. You never know when someone's going to find the right fit for themselves, or at least learn a new perspective of the game itself. With kids, you might try not keeping score. I'm not sure what side of the fence I sit in with that, but for little kids particularly, that might be fun. And as in our lecture on motivation, we want to maximize opportunities for success. I like that quote. I think it was from Einstein. If you judge a fish's intelligence by its ability to climb a tree, you'll always think it's stupid. So we want to make sure that we give people the opportunity to succeed, to find their own unique niche. Positive feedback we've discussed, and again, provide opportunities for youngsters to play different positions and even different sports. Maybe they're a great baseball player, but they'd really prefer to play soccer. All right, so you can blend those items when teaching and coaching physical skills, and try to, as much as possible, to individualize the instruction. That was one of the great components of success in Naperville, Indiana, with Dr. John Rady. We looked at that video very early in the semester, and they took a traditional PE program, which was much more sports-oriented, and instead made it fitness-oriented, and they put heart rate monitors on individuals, and it was fitness-based, and they had them work to their heart rate, their target heart rate zone, as opposed to competing directly with another person. And it was incredibly successful and remains successful to this day. We want to have both. Let's see if we can go back here. Yeah, we want to blend. We lost some words there. We want to structure some games for kids that have some elements of competition, but also elements of cooperation. And remember that if you're in a situation where you've got teams and you've got this fierce rivalry, you can use that superordinate goal. It's a term to remember. this overarching goal, I suppose, overarching, more appropriate word, to bring the people or the groups back together, and to, as a coach or as a person in a leadership position, learn how to give good, constructive, positive feedback, even if the outcome of the competition isn't exactly what people were looking for. There's always a way to learn from the situation. Cooperation is definitely going to help with communication, and sports are a very effective way of helping to develop these skills, particularly in young people. Yeah, what about that? Alrighty then.